Chapter 1. The Invitation to Blackthorn Manor. The rain pattered softly against the window of Hercule Poirot's London flat, a rhythmic counterpoint to the ticking of the ormolu clock on the mantel. Poirot, seated at his polished desk, adjusted his pince-nez and unfolded a cream-coloured envelope embossed with a crest of intertwined thorns. The letter within, penned in elegant script, bore the signature of Lady Evelyn Blackthorn, a name unfamiliar yet intriguing. It was an invitation to a weekend gala at Blackthorn Manor, a grand estate nestled in the misty folds of the English countryside. The letter's tone was polite, but carried an undercurrent of urgency, hinting at a matter that required Poirot's unique talents. "Mon Dieu," Poirot murmured, stroking his meticulously groomed moustache, a mystery cloaked in courtesy. "This is most interesting." The journey to Blackthorn Manor was a study in contrasts. The train from London sliced through fog-laden fields, and a chauffeured car awaited Poirot at the rural station, its engine purring like a contented cat. The driver, a taciturn man named Harris, spoke little, his eyes fixed on the winding road. As the car crested a hill, Blackthorn Manor came into view, a sprawling edifice of grey stone, its towers piercing the low clouds. Ivy clung to its walls, and the windows gleamed like watchful eyes. Poirot stepped from the car, his polished shoes crunching on the gravel drive. He adjusted his hat, noting the manor's imposing symmetry, a testament to order marred only by a single crooked weather vane atop the east tower. A small imperfection, he mused, but often it is the smallest flaw that reveals the truth. Lady Evelyn Blackthorn greeted him at the entrance, her silver hair swept into an elegant chignon. Her smile was warm, yet her eyes betrayed a flicker of unease. "Monsieur Poirot, your presence honors us," she said, guiding him into a grand foyer adorned with tapestries and a chandelier that glittered like a constellation. "I trust your journey was pleasant." "Most satisfactory, madame," Poirot replied, his gaze sweeping the room. "But I sense your invitation was not merely for the pleasure of my company." Lady Evelyn Sept's smile faltered. "You are perceptive, as expected. There is a matter, a delicate matter, concerning my late husband, Lord Reginald. But let us discuss it later, after you, Sept, met the others." The others proved a fascinating ensemble, gathered in the drawing-room for pre-dinner drinks. Poirot's keen eyes catalogued each guest as Lady Evelyn made introductions. Victor Blackthorn, Reginald's son, was a tall man in his 30s, with a restless energy, his hands fidgeting with a pocket watch. Beatrice Blackthorn, Reginald's sister, had a sharp gaze and a penchant for cryptic remarks, her black dress suggesting recent mourning. Clara Winthrop, a distant cousin and heiress, exuded confidence, her wit as sharp as the emerald brooch pinned to her gown. Julian Moreau, a French artist with a brooding air, stood apart, sketching idly in a leather-bound book. Lastly, Dr. Arthur Langley, the family physician, was a portly man with a nervous laugh, his spectacles slipping down his nose. "An eclectic gathering," Poirot remarked to Hastings, who had accompanied him at Lady Evelyn Sept's insistence. "Each face tells a story, mon ami, and not all are truthful." Dinner was a lavish affair, served in a dining-room dominated by a portrait of Lord Reginald Blackthorn. The painting, positioned above the fireplace, depicted a man in his prime, his dark eyes commanding and his smile enigmatic. Poirot studied it as the guests conversed, their voices a tapestry of forced gaiety and veiled tension. The portrait's smile seemed to shift under the flickering candlelight, a detail that lodged in Poirot's mind like a splinter. "Reginald was a man of vision," Lady Evelyn said, raising her glass. "This gala honors his memory, 6 months after his tragic accident." "Accident?" Poirot's voice was soft, but the word cut through the chatter. The room stilled. Victor's fork clattered against his plate, and Clara's eyes narrowed. "Yes," Lady Evelyn said, her composure intact. "A fall from the east tower. A dreadful misfortune." "Most unfortunate," Poirot agreed, his tone neutral. He noted Beatrice's tightened lips and Julian's sudden interest in his wineglass. Dr. Langley coughed, mumbling about slippery stone steps. The conversation shifted to lighter topics. but Poirot's mind remained on the portrait. Its brushstrokes were masterful, yet something about the composition, perhaps the tilt of Reginald's smile or the shadow in his eyes, felt discordant. He resolved to examine it closely later. After dinner, the guests retired to the library, where a fire crackled and shelves groaned under the weight of ancient tomes. Poirot lingered near the doorway, overhearing a whispered exchange between Victor and Clara. "It's not safe to talk here," Victor hissed. "Not with that detective snooping." Clara's reply was inaudible, but her sharp glance toward Poirot spoke volumes. Hastings, ever the loyal companion, sidled up to Poirot. "What do you make of it, old chap? Something saps off, isn't it?" "Oui, mon ami," Poirot replied, his eyes gleaming. "The air is thick with secrets. Lady Evelyn Sepp's invitation was no mere courtesy. There is a lie here, Hastings, and it hides in plain sight, perhaps in that portrait Sepp's smile." As the evening drew to a close, Poirot retired to his guest room, a spacious chamber overlooking the manor's gardens. He stood at the window, gazing at the moonlit grounds, his mind turning over the day's observations. The letter, the portrait, the guarded glances, all were pieces of a puzzle. He recalled a detail from the foyer. A small table held a vase of wilting roses, their petals scattered as if disturbed. A trivial detail, perhaps, but Poirot knew that truth often lay in the overlooked. He sat at the desk, penning notes in his precise handwriting. "The death of Lord Reginald," he wrote, "was no accident, I suspect. The portrait holds a clue. But what? And why does Lady Evelyn fear to speak plainly?" He paused, tapping his pen. The gala was a stage, and the guests were players in a drama of deception. Tomorrow he would begin to unravel their masks. As he extinguished the lamp, a distant creak echoed through the manor, like a door opened in secret. Poirot smiled faintly. "The game has begun," he murmured, "and Hercule Poirot shall not be outwitted." The rain continued to fall, a soft curtain over Blackthorn Manor, where shadows hid truths and a painted smile concealed a lie. Chapter 2. The Smile That Conceals. The morning sun filtered through the heavy drapes of Blackthorn Manor, casting long shadows across the dining room where Hercule Poirot sat, savouring a perfectly brewed cup of tea. His eyes, however, were not on the delicate porcelain, but on the portrait of Lord Reginald Blackthorn, which loomed above the fireplace. The painting dominated the room, its subject's smile both commanding and elusive, as if mocking the viewer with a secret. Poirot's little grey cells hummed with curiosity, for there was something in that smile that did not align with the symmetry he so cherished. "Mon Dieu," Poirot murmured to himself, adjusting his tie. "A portrait is a mirror of the soul, but this one, it conceals more than it reveals." Breakfast was a quieter affair than the previous night's dinner, with several guests absent. Lady Evelyn, poised at the head of the table, offered Poirot a strained smile. "I trust you slept well, Monsieur Poirot?" she inquired, her voice betraying a hint of fatigue. "Most adequately, madame," Poirot replied, his gaze flickering to the portrait, "though I confess my thoughts were occupied by your late husband Sepp's likeness. It is a remarkable work." Lady Evelyn's fingers tightened around her teacup. It was painted by Julian Moreau, our guest, completed just days before Reginald's accident. Her voice caught on the word, and she quickly sipped her tea. "An accident?" Poirot echoed softly, his tone inviting elaboration. "A fall from the East Tower, you said." "Most tragic." "Yes," Lady Evelyn replied, her eyes darting to the portrait. The steps were wet from rain. "He slipped, they say." She paused, then added, "The coroner was quite clear." Poirot nodded, his expression serene, but his mind alert. The coroner's clarity was no guarantee of truth, and Lady Evelyn's hesitation suggested she doubted the official account. He resolved to examine the portrait more closely, for its unsettling quality gnawed at him. The smile, he noted, was slightly asymmetrical, and the eyes seemed to follow him, a trick of artistry or something more. After breakfast, Poirot excused himself and sought out the household staff, believing that servants often saw what masters overlooked. In the kitchen, he found Mrs. Agnes Poole, The housekeeper, a stout woman with a no-nonsense demeanour, her hands, dusted with flour, paused as Poirot entered, his impeccable suit a stark contrast to the utilitarian surroundings. "Bonjour, madame," Poirot said, bowing slightly. "I am Hercule Poirot, a guest of Lady Evelyn. May I trouble you with a few questions?" Mrs. Poole-Stick's eyes narrowed, but she nodded. "If it's sex quick, sir. I sex bread to bake." "Of course," Poirot said, his smile disarming. "Lord Reginald Seb's death. It must have been a great shock to the household." "Aye, it was," Mrs. Poole replied, kneading dough with vigour. "His lordship was a strong man, not one to stumble, but accidents happen. Those said they." "Indeed," Poirot said, noting her guarded tone. Mrs. Poole-Amiss' hand stilled. "That painting, it sets uncanny, sir. The way he smiles, like he sets laughing at us all. Painted just before he died. Gave me chills when they hung it." Poirot sips.
Interest sharpened.
"Chills, you say? And was there anything unusual about Lord Reginald in those final days?" Mrs. Poole hesitated, glancing at the kitchen door. "He was troubled, sir, snapping at everyone, locking himself in his study, and there were arguments, loud ones, with Mr. Victor and Miss Beatrice. Something about a will, I reckon." "Most intriguing," Poirot said, filing away the information. "And the artist, Monsieur Moreau, did he have much contact with Lord Reginald?" "He was here for weeks painting that portrait," Mrs. Poole said. "Kept to himself, mostly. Odd fellow. Always muttering in French." Poirot thanked her and left the kitchen, his mind turning over the housekeeper's words. Arguments, a will, a troubled lord. The pieces were scattered, but a pattern was forming. He decided to inspect the portrait more closely, for its details might hold the key to the mystery. In the dining room, now empty save for a maid polishing silver, Poirot approached the portrait. Standing on a chair, a rare lapse in dignity for the fastidious detective, he examined the canvas. The brush strokes were bold yet precise, the colors vibrant, but the smile, it was too perfect, almost artificial. Poirot's keen eyes detected a faint irregularity in the paint around the mouth, as if the artist had layered over an earlier version. A correction, perhaps, he mused, or a concealment. He stepped down, his mind racing. The portrait was completed, days before Reginald's death, yet it bore signs of alteration. Had the artist Julian Moreau painted over a truth that Reginald wished to hide, or was the change made after his death, to obscure a clue? Poirot's reflections were interrupted by the arrival of Hastings, who looked flushed from a morning walk. "Poirot, you should see the gardens. Magnificent, but I overheard something odd. One of the gardeners mentioned a ladder found near the East Tower the morning after Reginald's fall, not mentioned in the coroner's report, apparently." "Vraiment?" Poirot's sister's eyes gleamed. "A ladder, you say? Most curious. The official account speaks only of slippery steps, yet a ladder suggests possibilities." "Foul play," Hastings ventured, his voice low. "Perhaps, mon ami," Poirot said, "but we must not leap to conclusions. The truth is like a fine tapestry. Pull one thread, and the design unravels." Determined to learn more, Poirot sought out Julian Moreau, finding him in the Manassept's conservatory, sketching a vase of orchids. The artist's dark eyes flicked up as Poirot approached, his pencil pausing. "Monsieur Poirot," Julian said, his French accent thick. "You admire art, I presume?" "I admire truth, Monsieur Moreau," Poirot replied, his tone light but probing. "Your portrait of Lord Reginald, it is a masterpiece, yet it puzzles me. The smile, it seems, not quite his own." Julian Sept's hand tightened on his pencil. A portrait captures the essence, not the man himself. Reginald wished to appear strong, eternal. I gave him that. "And nothing more?" Poirot asked, his gaze steady. Julian looked away, his jaw tight. "Nothing more." Poirot smiled faintly, sensing the lie. He excused himself. leaving Julian to his sketching, and returned to the dining room. Standing before the portrait once more, he studied the background, a shadowy depiction of the East Tower, where Reginald had fallen. A faint line, barely visible, suggested a window that did not match the manor's architecture. "Qu'est-ce que c'est?" Poirot murmured. A mistake, or a message. As the day drew to a close, Poirot sat in his room, his notebook open. He wrote, "The portrait hides a lie, and the smile is its mask. The ladder, the arguments, the altered paint, all point to a truth buried beneath the surface. Tomorrow I shall pull the first thread." The manor was silent, but the portrait's smile lingered in Poirot's mind, a challenge to his little grey cells. Chapter 3. Shadows of the Past. The morning mist clung to Blackthorn Manor like a shroud, softening the sharp edges of its stone facade. Hercule Poirot stood at the edge of the rose garden, his polished shoes damp from the dew, his mind as sharp as the thorns beside him. The portrait of Lord Reginald Blackthorn, with its unsettling smile, had occupied his thoughts through the night. Now he turned his attention to the living, for the family's secrets were as tangled as the ivy that choked the manor's walls. "Mon ami," Poirot said to Hastings, who joined him with a slightly dishevelled air, "the past is a map to the present. To understand Lord Reginald Sep's death, we must explore the shadows of the Blackthorn lineage." Hastings nodded, stifling a yawn. "Right, Poirot. But where do you start with a family like this? They cert also guarded." Poirot Sep's eyes twinkled, with the little grey cells, Hastings, and with questions that pierced the heart. His first opportunity came in the library, where Beatrice Blackthorn, Reginald's sister, sat by a window, a heavy shawl draped over her shoulders. Her sharp eyes, framed by lines of age and sorrow, met Poirot's as he approached, his demeanour courteous yet probing. "Mademoiselle Beatrice," Poirot began, bowing slightly, "I am Hercule Poirot, and I seek to understand the tragedy that has befallen your family. May we speak of your brother?" Beatrice's lips tightened, her fingers clutching a locket at her throat. "Reginald was a force, Monsieur Poirot, brilliant, commanding, but not always kind. His death was a shock." Yet she trailed off, her gaze drifting to the mist outside. "Yet," Poirot prompted, his voice soft as velvet. "Some might say it was fated," she replied cryptically. "The Blackthorns carry a curse, you see, a shadow that claims the head of the family. Reginald scoffed at it, but I wonder." Poirot leaned forward, his curiosity piqued. "A curse, mademoiselle. Of what nature?" Beatrice hesitated, then spoke in a low voice. "It began generations ago with a betrayal over a family heirloom, a sapphire brooch said to hold great power. Each heir who possessed it met misfortune. Reginald inherited it, but it vanished after his death. Some say it seeds the curse at work." Poirot Sep's mind catalogued the detail, a missing heirloom tied to a curse, mentioned in whispers. "And this brooch," he said, "was it mentioned in Lord Reginald Sep's will?" Beatrice's eyes flickered with surprise. "You stirch well informed, monsieur. Yes, it was in his will, meant for Victor, but it's sus gone, and Victor won't speak of it." Poirot thanked her, his thoughts racing. A missing heirloom, a family curse, and a death ruled an accident. Each piece was a thread in a tapestry of deception. He sought out Victor Blackthorn next, finding him in the billiard room, idly tapping a cue ball. "Monsieur Victor," Poirot said, entering with his characteristic precision, "I wish to discuss your father Sep's will, the sapphire brooch, perhaps." Victor Sep's hand froze, his jaw tightening. "What Sep's there to discuss? The brooch is gone. Stolen, probably." Father Sep's death stirred up all sorts of greed. Greed, Poirot Sep's tone, was mild, but his eyes were sharp. "And who might have coveted this heirloom?" Victor shrugged, his nonchalance forced. "Clara, perhaps. She steps always sniffing around for money. Or Beatrice, with her nonsense about curses." "I don't believe in that rot." Poirot noted the defensiveness in Victor Sep's voice, the way his eyes avoided the portrait of his father, which hung in this room as well. "Your father," Poirot said. He was a man of many enemies. None? Victor Sep's laugh was bitter. Enemies? He ruled this house like a tyrant, demanded loyalty, crushed dissent. Beatrice resented him for it. Clara, too. She wanted his fortune without his control. Poirot filed away Victor's words, sensing a fracture in the family's unity. He excused himself and sought out Lady Evelyn, hoping to clarify the will's details. He found her in the conservatory, tending to a wilting orchid with a tenderness that contrasted her guarded demeanor. "Madame," Poirot said, "the sapphire brooch mentioned in your husband Sep's will. It is missing, I understand. Was it of great value?" Lady Evelyn Sep's hands trembled slightly as she set down her pruning shears. "It was priceless, Monsieur Poirot, not just for its worth, but for its history. Reginald cherished it, though he rarely spoke of it. After his death we searched, but it was gone." "And the will?" Poirot pressed gently. "It named Victor as its recipient?" "Yes," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "But there were complications. Reginald changed his will shortly before his death. Not everyone was pleased." Poirot's mind whirred. A changed will, a missing heirloom, and a death too convenient to be accidental. He recalled the portrait's smile, its asymmetry, nagging at him. Was the brooch depicted in the painting? He resolved to check, but first he needed more context. He wandered to the manor's archives, a dusty room filled with leather-bound ledgers and family records. With Lady Evelyn's permission, he pored over documents, uncovering a history of Blackthorn patriarchs marked by ambition and tragedy. One entry, dated a century ago, described a scandal involving the sapphire brooch, a theft that led to a duel and a death. The curse, it seemed, was rooted in greed and betrayal. As Poirot closed the ledger, a young maid, Elsie, entered to dust the shelves. Sensing an opportunity, he engaged her in conversation. "Elsie," he said, his tone warm, "you must hear many things in this house. Was there talk of the brooch before Lord Reginald Sep's death?" Elsie blushed, glancing nervously at the door. "I shouldn't say, sir, but there was a row in the study the night before he died. Lord Reginald was shouting about the brooch, saying it was his legacy. I heard Mr. Victor Sep's voice, too, and Miss Beatrice Sep's." Poirot's sister's eyes gleamed. "And after the argument, I saw Mr. Julian, the artist, lurking near the study," Elsie whispered. He looked frightened. Poirot thanked her, his mind weaving the threads together. The brooch, the will, the argument, all pointed to a motive for murder. The portrait, he suspected, held a visual clue, perhaps a depiction of the brooch or a hint of the altercation. He returned to the dining room, standing before the painting once more. The sapphire brooch was absent, but the background's shadowy tower caught his eye again. A faint outline, barely visible, suggested a figure near the window, a detail not present in the real tower. "C'est curieux," Poirot murmured. "The portrait tells a story, but it is not the one it seems." As evening fell, Poirot sat in his room, his notebook open. He wrote, "The brooch is the key, and the curse is its shadow. Reginald Sep's death was no accident, and the family hides the truth. The portrait Sep's smile conceals a lie. But what? Tomorrow I shall seek the artist Sep's truth." The manor creaked under the weight of its secrets, and Poirot's little grey cells worked tirelessly, determined to unravel the shadows of the past. Chapter 4. The artist Sep's secret. The afternoon light filtered through the tall windows of Blackthorn Manor, casting a golden glow over the conservatory where Hercule Poirot found Julian Moreau. The artist sat hunched over a sketchbook, his pencil moving with feverish intensity across the page. Poirot, ever observant, noted the tension in Julian's shoulders, the way his dark eyes flicked nervously toward the door. The portrait of Lord Reginald Blackthorn, with its enigmatic smile, loomed in Poirot's mind, and he was determined to uncover what the artist knew. "Bonjour, Monsieur Moreau," Poirot said, his voice smooth as silk. "I see you are inspired today. May I observe your work?" Julian Fett's hand froze, his pencil hovering above a half-finished sketch of the Manor Sep's east tower. "Sep's nothing, Monsieur Poirot," he said. his French accent thick with unease. "Just impressions." Poirot smiled, his moustache twitching. "Impressions are often the key to truth, non. Your portrait of Lord Reginald, for instance. It is a masterpiece, yet it puzzles me. The smile, it seems to hide something." Julian closed his sketchbook with a snap, his jaw tightening. "A portrait is art, not a confession. I painted what Lord Reginald wished, a legacy of strength." "Of course," Poirot said, his tone disarming. "But I notice a curious detail. The paint on your cuff, monsieur. It is a shade of ochre not present in the portrait. Were you perhaps working on another piece?" Julian Fett's eyes widened briefly before he recovered, brushing at his cuff. "An old stain. I work on many canvases." Poirot Sip's gaze remained steady, his little grey cells alert to the lie. "Vraiment? Then perhaps you can enlighten me about Lord Reginald Sip's final days. You spent much time with him."
Oui, while painting.
"He was demanding," Julian admitted, his voice low. "He wanted the portrait perfect, a reflection of his power. We spoke little beyond that." Poirot nodded, sensing the artist's reluctance. He excused himself, but his suspicions were confirmed. Julian Moreau was hiding something, and it was tied to the portrait. That evening, as the manor settled into a restless quiet, Poirot resolved to explore the artist's studio. If the portrait concealed a secret, the studio might hold the evidence. Under the cover of darkness, Poirot slipped through the manor's corridors, his steps silent on the polished floors. The studio, located in a secluded wing, was a cluttered space filled with the scent of turpentine and linseed oil. Canvases leaned against the walls, and a single lamp cast flickering shadows. Poirot's eyes scanned the room, noting an easel draped with a cloth, a pile of discarded sketches, and a locked cabinet in the corner. He began with the sketches, flipping through pages of landscapes and portraits. One caught his attention, a preliminary study of Lord Reginald, his face stern, lacking the smile of the final painting. The background showed the East Tower, but with a figure at the window, a detail absent from the hung portrait. "C'est intéressant," Poirot murmured, tucking the sketch into his pocket. Next, he approached the easel, lifting the cloth to reveal an unfinished canvas. It depicted a woman, her features vague, but her posture regal, a sapphire brooch pinned to her gown. Poirot's pulse quickened. The brooch matched the description of the missing blackthorn heirloom. Was this a clue to its whereabouts or a red herring? The locked cabinet proved more challenging. Poirot, with a deftness born of necessity, used a hairpin from his pocket, a relic of past investigations, to pick the lock. Inside he found tubes of paint, brushes, and a small notebook. The notebook's pages were filled with cryptic entries, dates, color codes, and a single line in French. "Il m'a forcé à changer le sourire." He forced me to change the smile. Poirot's mind raced. Had Reginald instructed Julian to alter the portrait, perhaps to conceal the truth, or had someone else pressured the artist after Reginald's death? The ochre stain on Julian's cuff suggested recent work, possibly on this hidden canvas. Poirot replaced the notebook and relocked the cabinet, his thoughts turning to the East Tower depicted in the sketch. The figure at the window, was it a witness to Reginald's fall, or a symbol of something darker? As he left the studio, a floorboard creaked behind him. Poirot turned, his hand on his cane, but the corridor was empty. "Quelqu'un observe," he whispered, his senses heightened. The manor was alive with secrets, and someone was watching his movements. The next morning, Poirot confronted Julian in the garden, where the artist was sketching a rosebush. "Monsieur Moreau," Poirot said, his tone firm, "I have seen your studio, the sketch of Lord Reginald, the canvas with the brooch, the notebook. You changed the portrait Sep's smile. Non. Why?" Julian Seps's pencil snapped in his hand, his face paling. "You had no right," he hissed, then softened, his shoulders sagging. "Reginald demanded it. He said the original smile was too revealing. I did as he asked. It's Sep's just paint." "Paint can tell a story," Poirot countered. "And yours tells of fear. What did you hide in that portrait?" Julian looked away, his voice barely audible. "I hid nothing. But the night he died, I heard shouts from the tower. I saw nothing, I swear." Poirot's sit's eyes narrowed. "Yet you painted a figure at the tower sip's window in your sketch. Who was it?" "I don't fint know," Julian snapped, then caught himself. It was imagination, nothing more. Poirot let the silence hang, his gaze piercing. Julian's fear was genuine, but his denial was not. The artist knew more than he admitted, and the altered smile was a clue to a deeper truth. Poirot thanked him and walked away, his mind piecing together the puzzle. The portrait's smile, the missing brooch, the figure in the sketch, all were threads in a web of deception. Back in his room, Poirot sat at his desk, his notebook open. He wrote, "Julian Moreau conceals a truth forced by Reginald or another." The smile was changed to hide something, perhaps a motive for murder. The brooch in the unfinished canvas suggests it is near, but where? The tower holds the answer, and I must see it. As the sun dipped below the horizon, Poirot gazed out his window at the east tower, its silhouette stark against the twilight. The manor's secrets were beginning to surface, but the truth remained elusive, hidden behind a painted smile and an artist's lies. Chapter 5. The Locked Room Riddle. The clock in Blackthorn Manor's grand hall struck midnight, its chimes echoing through the silent corridors. Hercule Poirot, unable to sleep, sat in his room, his notebook open to a page filled with meticulous observations about the portrait, the missing brooch, and Julian Moreau's evasions. The manor's secrets weighed heavily on his little grey cells, but a sudden commotion shattered his thoughts, a piercing scream followed by hurried footsteps. Poirot rose, slipping on his dressing gown with the precision of a man accustomed to order even in chaos. He stepped into the corridor where Hastings emerged, his hair dishevelled. "Poirot, it's Sard's Clara Winthrop. They found her unconscious in the West Wing." "Mon Dieu," Poirot murmured, his eyes narrowing. "Lead the way, mon ami." The West Wing was a flurry of activity. Lady Evelyn, pale and trembling, stood outside a heavy oak door, flanked by Victor and Beatrice. Dr. Langley knelt beside Clara, who lay slumped on the floor inside a small study, her emerald brooch glinting in the lamplight. The door, Poirot noted, was locked from the inside, the key still in the lock. A window, high and narrow, was latched shut, and no other exits were apparent. "What has happened?" Poirot demanded, his voice calm but commanding. "She was found like this," Lady Evelyn said, wringing her hands. Elsie, the maid, heard a thud and called for help. "The door was locked. We had to break it open." Poirot knelt beside Dr. Langley, who was checking Clara Sip's pulse. "She Sip's alive," the doctor said, his voice unsteady. "A blow to the head, I think. She Sip's coming round." Clara stirred, her eyes fluttering open. "The portrait," she mumbled, her voice weak. It lied. Poirot's gaze sharpened. He noticed a crumpled piece of paper clutched in Clara's hand. Gently, he pried it free, unfolding it to reveal a scrawled note. The smile hides the truth. "Look to the tower." The handwriting was unsteady, as if written in haste. "C'est curieux," Poirot said, pocketing the note. "A locked room, an attack, and a message about the portrait. This is no coincidence." He examined the room with his characteristic thoroughness. The study was small, lined with bookshelves and a single desk. A candelabra lay toppled on the floor, its wax spattered near Clara's head, likely the weapon used to strike her. The lock on the door was intact, with no signs of tampering, and the window's latch was rusted, suggesting it hadn't been opened in years. Poirot's fingers traced the edges of the desk, finding a faint scratch, as if something heavy had been dragged across it. "Monsieur Victor Poirot said, turning to the young man who stood rigid by the door, when was Miss Winthrop last seen?" Victor shifted uncomfortably. "At dinner, I suppose. She was her usual self, sharp-tongued, stirring trouble." "And you, Mademoiselle Beatrice?" Beatrice's lips pursed. "I saw her in the library after dinner reading. She seemed agitated, kept glancing at the portrait." Poirot nodded, his mind cataloguing their responses. He turned to Dr. Langley. "The blow to the head. How severe?" Not life-threatening, Langley replied, adjusting his spectacles. She'll recover, but she needs rest. Poirot instructed Elsie to help Clara to her room, then addressed the gathered guests. This incident is connected to Lord Reginald Sibt's death. The note speaks of the portrait and the tower where he fell. I must ask you all to remain vigilant. The guests exchanged uneasy glances, their faces etched with suspicion. Julian Moreau, lingering at the edge of the group, avoided Poirot's gaze, his hands stuffed in his pockets. Lady Evelyn's composure wavered, and Victor's eyes darted toward the broken door. Poirot returned to the study alone, closing the door behind him. He stood in the center, his eyes scanning every detail. The locked room was a puzzle, and Poirot relished such challenges. He tested the window, confirming its immobility, and examined the lock again. The key turned smoothly, but he noticed a faint oil residue on the mechanism, recent, not the dust of neglect. "Interessant," he murmured. Someone had prepared the lock, perhaps to ensure it appeared locked from within. He moved to the desk where the scratch mark intrigued him. Kneeling, he peered beneath it, finding a small notch in the floorboard barely visible. With a gentle tug, the board lifted, revealing a narrow space, empty but large enough to conceal a small object, perhaps the sapphire brooch. A hiding place, Poirot mused. But for what? The candelabra caught his attention. Next, its base was heavy, ideal for a sudden blow, but the wax spatter suggested it had been lit recently. Poirot sniffed the air, detecting a faint trace of perfume, Clara's perhaps, or another's. The note's handwriting nagged at him. It was unfamiliar yet deliberate, as if meant to be found. Stepping back, Poirot reconstructed the scene in his mind. Clara had entered the study, possibly to search for something. Someone had followed, struck her with the candelabra, and left the note. The locked door suggested an impossible crime, but Poirot knew there was no such thing. "The solution lies in the method," he said softly. "A trick, perhaps, with the lock or the key." He recalled the note's words. Look to the tower. The East Tower, where Reginald had fallen, was a recurring motif in the portrait, in Julian's sketch. And now here was Clara attacked because she knew something about the tower, or was the note a misdirection meant to lure Poirot into a trap? As dawn broke, Poirot met Hastings in the garden, where the air was crisp with morning dew. "This locked room is no mystery, Hastings," he said, his eyes gleaming. "It is a stage, set to confuse. But the note, it points to the truth. The tower holds a secret, and I suspect Miss Winthrop was close to uncovering it." Hastings frowned. "But who attacked her, and how did they lock the door?" Poirot smiled faintly. "Patience, mon ami." The lock was oiled, the board was loose, and the note was deliberate. Someone wishes to control the narrative, but Hercule Poirot will not be misled. Back in his room, Poirot added to his notebook. Clara's attack is a warning, or a diversion. The locked room is a clever ruse, but the oil on the lock betrays preparation. The note links the portrait to the tower, suggesting Reginald's death was witnessed or staged. I must visit the tower and question Clara when she recovers. The manor buzzed with whispers as the guests awoke, their trust eroding. Poirot stood at his window, gazing at the East Tower, its silhouette stark against the rising sun. The portrait's smile, the missing brooch, and now a locked room, all were pieces of a puzzle, and Poirot was determined to fit them together. Chapter 6. Whispers in the Gallery. The afternoon light filtered through the tall, arched windows of Blackthorn Manor's portrait gallery, casting a soft glow over the rows of stern-faced ancestors. Hercule Poirot stood in the center of the long, narrow room, his polished shoes silent on the polished oak floor. The gallery was a chronicle of the Blackthorn lineage, each painting a testament to wealth, power, and secrets. The portrait of Lord Reginald Blackthorn, with its unsettling smile, lingered in Poirot's mind, but here, among older faces, he sought clues to the past that might illuminate the present. "Mon Dieu," Poirot murmured. Adjusting his pince-nez, the past whispers to those who listen, and Hercule Poirot is an excellent listener. The gallery was quiet, save for the faint creak of the manor settling. Poirot moved from one portrait to another, his keen eyes noting the details. The heavy brushstrokes of a 17th-century blackthorn patriarch, the delicate lace on a lady's gown from the Georgian era, the sombre palette of a Victorian air. Each painting was distinct, yet none carried the peculiar asymmetry of Reginald's smile or the odd shadow of the East Tower. The style, Poirot mused. It is different. Why? He paused before a portrait of Sir Edmund Blackthorne dated 1842, a man with a hawkish nose and piercing eyes. The frame was ornate but slightly askew, as if recently disturbed. Poirot, ever attentive to the smallest irregularity, reached up and gently tilted the frame. To his surprise, it swung outward on hidden hinges, revealing a shallow recess in the wall. Inside was a folded parchment, yellowed with age, bearing a wax seal broken long ago. "C'est magnifique," Poirot said softly, unfolding the document with care. The ink was faded but legible. A letter written in a spidery hand. It spoke of a scandal, Sir Edmund's theft of the sapphire brooch from a rival family, sparking a feud that ended in bloodshed. The letter ended with a cryptic warning. "The brooch carries the curse of betrayal. Guard it or it will claim you." Poirot's little grey cells buzzed. The brooch, mentioned in Reginald's will and depicted in Julian Moreau's unfinished canvas, was tied to this scandal. Was its disappearance a continuation of the curse, or a calculated act? He tucked the parchment into his pocket, resolving to compare its handwriting to the note found with Clara Winthrop. As he replaced the frame, footsteps echoed behind him. Mrs. Agnes Poole, the housekeeper, entered, her arms laden with cleaning cloths. Her eyes widened at the sight of Poirot, but she quickly recovered. "Monsieur Poirot," she said, her voice tight, "I didn't just expect to find you here." "Madame Poole," Poirot replied, his smile disarming, "I am merely admiring the Blackthorn legacy. This gallery, it holds many stories." "None." Mrs. Poole nodded, her hands fidgeting. "Ah, it does. Too many, if you ask me. These old portraits, they have seen things best forgotten." Poirot seized the opportunity, such as the sapphire brooch. "I understand it has a troubled history." Her face paled. "You seb heard of the curse, then? Folks say it. The seb's nonsense, but I seb seen strange things in this house. Lord Reginald was obsessed with that brooch, kept it locked in his study. After he died, it vanished. Poof, like it was never there." "And what do the servants say?" Poirot asked, his tone gentle but probing. There are always whispers below stairs. Mrs. Poole glanced at the door, lowering her voice. "Some say Mr. Victor took it, to sell it. Others think Miss Beatrice hid it to spite him. And then there sits talk of darker things. Deals Reginald made, debts he owed. He wasn't sit a kind man, sir." Poirot Sipt's eyes gleamed. "Debts, you say?" "I don't know names," she said quickly, "but there were visitors, late at night before he died. Rough sorts. Not the kind you sept expect at Blackthorn Manor. I heard them arguing in the study. Something about a payment." Poirot filed away this revelation. Reginald Sep's secret dealings could explain the tension in the family and the motive for his death. "And the portrait," he said. "Did Lord Reginald speak of it?" Mrs. Poole shivered. "He called it his legacy, said it would outlast him. But that smile, it sets not right, sir, like he sets mocking us from beyond." Thanking her, Poirot left the gallery, his mind turning over the new clues. The scandalous letter, the brooch's curse, Reginald's debts, all pointed to a motive rooted in the past. The portrait's smile, altered by Julian, was a key, but its meaning remained elusive. He recalled the note from Clara's attack. The smile hides the truth. Look to the tower. The East Tower, depicted in the portrait, and Julian's sketch, was a recurring thread. Seeking solitude, Poirot retreated to the garden, where Hastings found him pacing among the roses. "Poirot, you look like a bloodhound on the scent," Hastings said. "What sets in that gallery?" "A scandal, mon ami," Poirot replied, showing him the parchment. "The brooch is at the heart of this mystery, and Reginald Sep's death is its shadow. His dealings, his debts, they suggest a man entangled in danger. Hastings frowned, and Clara Sipp's attack. Is it connected? Oui, Poirot said. She knew something, perhaps about the brooch or the tower. The locked room was a stage, meant to frighten or mislead. But the truth is close, Hastings. That evening, Poirot returned to the dining room, standing before Reginald's portrait. The smile seemed to taunt him, its asymmetry more pronounced in the flickering candlelight. He studied the background, noting again the faint figure at the tower's window, a detail not present in reality. Was it a clue to a witness or a deliberate misdirection by Julian? In his room, Poirot added to his notebook. The gallery reveals a scandal, and the brooch is its legacy. Reginald's debts point to enemies outside the family, yet the portrait suggests an inside hand. The tower is the key, and Clara's attacker knows it. Tomorrow I must see the tower and speak to Clara. The manor slept uneasily, its walls whispering of betrayal and loss. Poirot gazed at the moonlit east tower, its silhouette a silent challenge. The portrait's smile hid a truth, and he was determined to uncover it, no matter how deeply it was buried in the shadows of the past. Chapter 7. The Aris Sept's alibi. The morning sun cast a pale light through the curtains of Blackthorn Manor's morning room, where Hercule Poirot sat, his teacup balanced with the precision of a man who valued order above all. The events of the previous night, Clara Winthrop's attack in the locked study, the cryptic note and the growing web of secrets, had set his little grey cells ablaze. Clara, now recovered enough to speak, was the key to unravelling the next thread in the mystery of Lord Reginald Blackthorn's death and the enigmatic portrait that seemed to mock him with its smile. "Mon ami," Poirot said to Hastings, who hovered nearby, "Miss Winthrop is a puzzle within a puzzle. Her attack was no accident, and her words may hold the truth or another lie." Hastings nodded, his brow furrowed. "She said's a tough one, Poirot, sharp as a tack, but cagey. Do you think she knows who attacked her?" "Perhaps," Poirot replied, his eyes gleaming. "But first we must test her alibi for the night of Lord Reginald Sept's death. The heiress, she plays a role in this drama, and I intend to discover what it is." Poirot found Clara in the conservatory, seated among the orchids, her face pale but composed. Her emerald brooch, a stark contrast to her dark dress, glinted as she adjusted her posture. "Monsieur Poirot," she said, her voice sharp despite her recent ordeal, "I assume you're here to interrogate me about that wretched night." "Mademoiselle," Poirot said, bowing slightly, "I seek only the truth. You were attacked, and a note was found in your hand, speaking of the portrait and the tower. But let us begin with the night Lord Reginald died. Where were you?" Claracel's eyes narrowed, her fingers tracing the brooch. "In my room, reading. I had no reason to wander the manor at midnight. Reginald Sells' fall was tragic, but I had nothing to do with it." Poirot sits, mustache twitched. A simple alibi, yet it lacks substance. The servants recall hearing arguments that night in the study. Your name was mentioned. None? And the sapphire brooch, so central to the family Sipp's legacy, was it not a source of contention? Clara Sipp's composure faltered, her hand dropping to her lap. "You sought fishing, monsieur." "Yes," I argued with Reginald that week, but not that night. He was obsessed with that brooch, said it was Victor Sipp's birthright. I told him it was foolish to pin the family Sipp's future on a cursed trinket." "Cursed?" Poirot leaned forward, his gaze piercing. "You believe in this curse, then?" Clara laughed, a brittle sound. "I believe in greed, Monsieur Poirot. That brooch was worth a fortune, and Reginald dangled it like a prize. Victor wanted it, Beatrice feared it, and I thought it should be sold to secure the estate, but Reginald wouldn't sit hear of it." Poirot noted the tension in her voice, the way her eyes flicked to the window, and the night of his death he pressed. "You heard nothing, saw nothing? The East Tower is not far from your room." Clara hesitated, her fingers tightening on the armrest. I may have heard raised voices from the direction of the tower, but it was late, and I was half asleep. I assumed it was Reginald and Victor arguing again. Vraiment? Poirot's tone was mild, but his mind was alert. Yet you did not investigate. A scream, a fall, and you remained in your room. I felt not a fool, Clara snapped. This house is full of secrets. I learned long ago to mind my own business. Poirot smiled faintly, sensing a crack in her armor. And last night, mademoiselle, you were found in a locked room, a note in your hand. The smile hides the truth. Look to the tower. What were you seeking in that study? Clara Sepp's face hardened. I was looking for Reginald Sepp's will, their Sepp's talk. He changed it before he died, and I wanted to know the truth. Someone must have followed me, struck me. I don't suit remember anything after that. Poirot studied her, his little grey cells piecing together her words. The will, the brooch, the tower, all were connected, and Clara Sepp's alibi was too convenient, too vague. The note, he said, producing it from his pocket. Do you recognize the handwriting? Clara glanced at it, her expression unreadable. No, but it Sepp's about that damned portrait. Isn't Sepp's it? Reginald Sepp's smile. It's Sepp's wrong. I noticed it the day it was hung. It's Sepp's not the man I knew. Poirot Stitt's eyes gleamed. And what man did you know, mademoiselle? Clara looked away, her voice low. A tyrant, a man who controlled everything, his family, his fortune, even that brooch. He made enemies, Monsieur Poirot, and not just in this house. Poirot thanked her and left the conservatory, his mind racing. Clara's partial truth was a thread, but it was tangled with lies. Her alibi for Reginald's death was shaky, and her interest in the will suggested a motive, perhaps greed, perhaps fear. The note, with its reference to the portrait and the tower, implied she had been close to uncovering something dangerous. He sought out Hastings in the library, where his friend was flipping through a book on local history. Well, Poirot, Hastings asked. Did Clara crack? She bends but does not break, Poirot replied, pacing. Her alibi is weak, and her interest in the will is telling. She knows more about the brooch and the tower than she admits. The attack was meant to silence her, or to warn us all. Hastings frowned. But the locked room, how did the attacker get out? A question for another time, Poirot said. The note points to the tower, as does the portrait. I must see it, Hastings, to understand what Clara sought. That afternoon, Poirot climbed the spiral staircase to the east tower, its stone steps worn but dry, contrary to the coroner's report of a slippery fall. The platform at the top was narrow, with a low parapet overlooking the gardens. Poirot examined the stone, finding faint scratches near the edge, as if something heavy had been dragged. A ladder, perhaps? He mused, recalling the gardener's tale. The tower offered a clear view of the manor, including the study where Clara was attacked. Was this the vantage point of a witness or a killer? In his room that evening, Poirot added to his notebook, Clara's alibi is fragile, her motives unclear. The tower's scratches suggest a staged fall, and the note links it to the portrait's smile. The brooch remains the heart of this mystery, and Clara knows more than she reveals. Tomorrow I must press harder. The manor hummed with unease, its guests whispering of danger. Poirot gazed at the tower from his window, its shadow stretching across the lawn like a finger pointing to the truth. The portrait's smile, Clara's secrets, and the tower's scars were pieces of a puzzle, and Poirot was determined to fit them together. Chapter 8. The Midnight Confession. The moon hung low over Blackthorn Manor, its pale light casting eerie shadows through the tall windows. Hercule Poirot, unable to sleep, paced his guest room, his mind a whirl of clues. The altered portrait, the missing sapphire brooch, Clara's attack, and the scratches on the east tower. The manor was a labyrinth of secrets, and each step brought him closer to the truth. As the clock struck midnight, a muffled shout from the corridor snapped his attention. Poirot, ever alert, slipped on his dressing gown and stepped silently into the hall, his little grey cells primed for discovery. "Mon Dieu," he whispered, pressing himself against the wall as voices grew louder emanating from the library. The tones were unmistakable. Victor Blackthorne's sharp tenor and Beatrice Blackthorne's low, urgent murmur. Poirot crept closer, his polished shoes silent on the rug, and positioned himself near the slightly ajar library door. "You can keep this up, Beatrice." Victor Sepp's voice was taut with anger. "If Poirot finds out, we finished. Why didn't you destroy it?" "Destroy it?" Beatrice hissed. "It's all we have left of him. You're a fool, Victor, to think you can bury the truth. The portrait knows." Poirot's pulse quickened. The portrait again, its smile a constant thread in this tangled mystery. He edged closer, peering through the crack in the door. Victor stood by the fireplace, his face flushed, while Beatrice clutched a book to her chest, her eyes blazing with defiance. "The portrait is just paint," Victor snapped. "Your obsession with that curse is madness. Father Sepp's death was an accident. Let it go." "An accident?" Beatrice Sick's laugh was bitter. "You know it wasn't sicked, that brooch, the will, the lies, they sicked all connected, and you sicked, sir, as guilty as anyone." Poirot sipped, his mind raced. A cover-up confirmed at last. He considered revealing himself, but decided to wait, hoping for more. Beatrice Sipter's next words were softer, almost a whisper. "I saw you, Victor, that night, near the tower. You can hide it forever." Victor Sepp's face paled, and he grabbed her arm. "Keep your voice down, if Poirot hears." Poirot chose that moment to step into the room, his presence like a sudden spotlight. "Monsieur Victor, Mademoiselle Beatrice," he said, his voice calm but commanding. "Hercule Poirot has heard enough. Shall we discuss this cover-up?" Victor released Beatrice, his hands trembling. "You've been spying," he accused, but his bravado was thin. "Observing," Poirot corrected, his moustache twitching. "The truth. It has a way of revealing itself. Mademoiselle Beatrice, you spoke of the portrait, and a secret. I am all ears." Beatrice Moll's shoulders sagged, her defiance giving way to exhaustion. She sank into a chair, the book slipping to the floor. "You don't understand, Monsieur Poirot. This family is cursed, not by some ghost, but by our own deeds. Reginald, he wasn't what he seemed." Poirot sat opposite her, his gaze steady. "And what was he, mademoiselle? A tyrant, as Miss Winthrop claims. A man with enemies, as the whispers suggest." Beatrice's eyes glistened. "He was both, and more. The sapphire brooch. It wasn't just a jewel. It was his leverage, his control over us. He changed his will to keep us in line, promising the brooch to Victor but threatening to give it to Clara. He played us against each other." Poirot nodded, recalling Clara's interest in the will, and the night he died, he prompted gently. Beatrice hesitated, glancing at Victor, who stood rigid by the fireplace. "I heard him arguing in the study with someone angry voices about the brooch. Later I saw Victor near the tower just before the fall." Victor spun around, his voice sharp. "I was checking the grounds. You set her twisting things." "Beatrice." Poirot raised a hand, silencing him. "Monsieur, your protestations are noted. Mademoiselle, continue." Beatrice took a shaky breath. "I don't know who was with him, but the portrait it's wrong. Reginald's smile wasn't like that. Julian changed it, after his death. I saw him in the studio, late at night, painting over it." Poirot's eyes gleamed. "Vraiment?" The artist altered the portrait posthumously. "Why?" "I don't know," Beatrice admitted, "but it's tied to the secret, the brooch, the will, everything. I tried to warn Clara, but then she was attacked." Poirot's mind whirred. Beatrice's confession was partial, but it confirmed Julian's deception and hinted at Victor's involvement. The portrait's altered smile was a deliberate act, perhaps to conceal a clue to Reginald's death. He thanked Beatrice and dismissed Victor, who stormed out, muttering under his breath. Alone with Beatrice, Poirot softened his tone. "Mademoiselle, you carry a burden. If there is more, tell me now." Beatrice shook her head, tears welling. I, Sepp, said too much. But look to the study, Monsieur Poirot. Reginald Sepp's secrets are there. Poirot returned to his room, his thoughts racing. The study where Clara was attacked, where arguments were overheard, was a focal point. He resolved to search it, but first he needed to verify Beatrice's claims. At dawn he slipped into the study, now unguarded, and began a meticulous search. The desk drawers yielded little, but under a blotter he found a document, a draft of Reginald's will, dated days before his death. The ink was smudged, and a clause about the brooch was scratched out, replaced with a vague reference to family legacy. "C'est un scandal," Poirot murmured. The tampering was clumsy, suggesting haste or panic. Was this the work of Victor trying to secure the brooch, or Clara seeking to alter her inheritance? The document was a cliffhanger, a piece of the puzzle that raised more questions than answers. Poirot met Hastings in the garden, sharing his findings. "Beatrice has opened a door, mon ami," he said, "but it leads to more shadows. The tampered will, the altered portrait, the tower, they are linked. Victor Sept's presence that night cannot be ignored." Hastings frowned. "Do you think Victor pushed his father?" "Perhaps," Poirot said. "Or he witnessed something he dares not admit. The study holds more secrets, and I must return there." In his notebook, Poirot wrote, "Beatrice Spes, confession points to a cover-up, with Victor at the tower and Julian altering the portrait. The tampered will suggests someone sought to control the brooch, Sip's fate. The study is the next step, and Clara Sip's attack may be the key to unlocking it." The manor was restless, its guests whispering of betrayal. Poirot gazed at the east tower, its silhouette a silent witness. The portrait's smile, the tampered will, and Beatrice's words were threads in a web, and he was determined to unravel it before another strike came from the shadows. Chapter 9. The portrait sits hidden layer. The morning air in Blackthorn Manor was thick with tension, as if the walls themselves held their breath. Hercule Poirot stood in the dining room, his eyes fixed on the portrait of Lord Reginald Blackthorn, its enigmatic smile taunting him with secrets. The events of the past days, Clara's attack, Beatrice's confession, the tampered will, had woven a complex web, and Poirot was certain the portrait held a crucial clue. Its altered smile, as Beatrice had revealed, was no mere artistic choice, but a deliberate act of concealment. To uncover the truth, Poirot needed expertise beyond his own. "Mon ami," Poirot said to Hastings, who joined him with a cup of coffee. "The portrait is a liar, but it cannot hide from science. We must see beneath its surface." Hastings raised an eyebrow. "Beneath? You mean X-rays or something?" "Precisement," Poirot replied, his moustache twitching. "I have arranged for a local art restorer, Monsieur Edward Hale, to assist us. He arrives this morning with his equipment." Edward Hale, a wiry man with ink-stained fingers and a scholarly air, arrived promptly, carrying a case of specialized tools. Lady Evelyn, though hesitant, granted permission to examine the portrait, her unease palpable. The dining room was cleared, and Hale set up a portable ultraviolet lamp and a magnifying lens, his movements precise. Poirot watched intently, his little grey cells humming with anticipation. "Monsieur Hale," Poirot said, "we seek what lies beneath the paint. The smile, it was changed. I wish to know what it hides." Hale nodded. Adjusting the lamp, ultraviolet light can reveal under paintings earlier versions of a work. If the artist altered the portrait, we shall see it. As the lamp's eerie glow bathed the canvas, the portrait's surface seemed to shift. The smile, so unsettling in daylight, took on a ghostly quality. Hale peered through his lens, his breath catching. "There's something here," he said, pointing to the area around Reginald's mouth. "A different layer, painted over." The original smile was sterner, almost a grimace. Poirot leaned closer, his eyes narrowing. A grimace. Hale adjusted the lamp, revealing faint outlines in the background. The east tower, a constant motif, showed a subtle difference, a shadow near the window more defined than in the final version. "This shadow," Hale said. "It's not architectural. It looks like a figure, painted over to blend with the tower. C'est extraordinaire, Poirot murmured. A figure, as in Monsieur Moreau's Sit's sketch. The artist concealed it. But why? Hale continued his examination, noting irregularities in the paint around Reginald Suz. The eyes were altered, too, he said. They were sharper, more intense in the original. The final version softens them, makes them less accusing. Poirot's mind raced. The portrait had been repainted to change Reginald's expression and obscure a figure at the tower. Was this figure a witness to his fall, or a symbol of his killer? The alterations done after his death, according to Beatrice, suggested someone, perhaps Julian Moreau, had a motive to hide the truth. Monsieur Hale, Poirot asked, can you tell when these changes were made? Hale shook his head. Not precisely, but the overpaint is fresh, no more than a year old. The pigments are slightly different, less aged. Poirot thanked him, his thoughts turning to Julian. The artist's evasions, the ochre stain on his cuff, the notebook's cryptic note, Il me forçait à changer le sourire, all pointed to coercion. But by whom? Reginald, before his death, or another after it? As Hale packed his equipment, Poirot lingered before the portrait, its secrets now partially exposed. The hidden layer was a revelation, but it raised new questions. He recalled the note from Clara's attack. The smile hides the truth. Look to the tower. The figure in the painting, like the scratches on the tower's parapet, suggested a staged death, not an accident. Seeking further insight, Poirot sought out Lady Evelyn, finding her in the drawing-room, her hands folded tightly in her lap. "Madam," he said, "the portrait has revealed its secret, a hidden layer with a sterner smile and a figure at the tower. Why was it changed?" Lady Evelyn's face paled. I didn't know." Julian said the portrait was finished before Reginald died. If he altered it after, she trailed off, her eyes distant. "After," Poirot prompted gently. "You suspect someone instructed him, non?" She shook her head, her voice trembling. Reginald was secretive in his final days. He spoke of the portrait as his legacy, but he was troubled. The brooch, the will, he was hiding something, even from me. Poirot noted her distress, sensing she knew more but was not ready to confess. He excused himself and met Hastings in the garden, where the air was crisp with the promise of rain. "The portrait's hidden layer confirms Beatrice's claim," he said. "Julian altered it, but the question is who ordered it and why. The figure at the tower, it is the key." Hastings frowned. "A witness, you think? Or the killer?" "Perhaps both," Poirot replied. "The tower, the brooch, the will, all converge. The portrait was changed to protect someone, or to hide a truth about Reginald Sepp's death." That evening Poirot returned to his room, his notebook open. He wrote, "The hidden layer reveals a sterner Reginald and a figure at the tower, painted over after his death. Julian was coerced. But by whom? The brooch remains missing, and the tower holds the answer. Clara's attack, Beatrice's confession, Victor's presence, all point to a conspiracy." As he closed his notebook, a distant rumble of thunder echoed over the manor. Poirot gazed at the east tower, its silhouette stark against the gathering storm. The portrait's smile was no longer just a mystery. It was a lie, crafted to conceal a murder. He was closer to the truth, but the web of deception was tightening, and he sensed danger lurking in the shadows. Chapter 10. The Garden of Motives. The gardens of Blackthorn Manor bloomed with deceptive serenity, their roses and lavender swaying in the late afternoon breeze. Hercule Poirot, his polished shoes crunching on the gravel path, strolled among the flower beds, his mind as sharp as the thorns around him. The portrait's hidden layer, revealed by the art restorer, had confirmed a deliberate alteration, a sterner smile, a shadowy figure at the east tower, pointing to a truth concealed by paint and lies. Clara's attack, Beatrice's confession, and the tampered will had tightened the web of deception, and Poirot sought to unravel it by listening to the manor's unguarded voices. "Mon ami," Poirot said to Hastings, who walked beside him, in a garden One hears the whispers of the heart. The guests, they speak freely here, away from the Manassept's walls. Let us listen. Hastings nodded, his eyes scanning the grounds. You think they still let something slip? They simmer a cagey lot, Poirot. Ooh-ee. But even the cautious betray themselves, Poirot replied, his moustache twitching. Motives, Hastings. They are the roots of this crime. As they rounded a hedge, Poirot's ears caught the low murmur of voices near a stone bench. Victor Blackthorne and Dr. Arthur Langley stood in heated discussion, their words carried by the breeze. Poirot signaled Hastings to pause, and they concealed themselves behind a trellis, listening intently. You don't understand, Langley, Victor said, his voice strained. Father Set's debts were crushing us. He owed thousands to those men, shady types, not the sort you serf'd invite to tea. If I didn't set act, the estate would serf been ruined. Langley is... Sir, nervous laugh echoed. No, Victor snapped. But I wanted him gone. He was a tyrant, holding that brooch over my head, threatening to cut me out of the will. I had motive. I admit it, but I didn't push him. Poirot's eyes gleamed. Victor's admission of motive financial ruin was a significant thread. The debts mentioned by Mrs. Poole suggested external enemies, but Victor's presence near the tower, as Beatrice had claimed, kept him in the frame. Moving deeper into the garden, Poirot overheard another conversation near a fountain, where Clara Winthrop, now recovered, spoke with Julian Moreau. Her voice was sharp, cutting through the gurgle of water. You knew, Julian, she said. That portrait, you changed it for a reason. What did Reginald tell you before he died? Julian Seb's reply was low, almost inaudible. He told me to make him look eternal, untouchable. But that smile, it wasn't Seb's my choice. Someone else demanded it, after his death. Who? Clara pressed, her tone fierce. You owe me the truth, Julian. I nearly died in that study. I can say, Julian muttered. But it's tied to the brooch. Reginald said it was his leverage, his power over the family. Poirot's mind whirred. Julian's words confirmed Beatrice's claim of a posthumous alteration, and the brooch's role as leverage echoed Clara's earlier statements. But who had coerced Julian, and why was Clara so determined to uncover the portrait's secret? As Poirot and Hastings circled toward the rose garden, they spotted Beatrice alone, pruning a bush with unsteady hands. Poirot approached, his demeanor courteous but probing. Mademoiselle Beatrice, he said, the garden is a place of reflection. May I ask what weighs on your mind? Beatrice's eyes flicked up, haunted. You stir relentless, Monsieur Poirot. I told you about the curse, the brooch, Reginald Sap's death. It was no accident. He betrayed us all, with his secrets and his debts. I hated him for it, but I didn't kill him. Then who did? Poirot asked softly. You saw Victor near the tower. What else did you see? Beatrice Shears paused. A shadow at the tower scepter's window just before the fall. I thought it was my imagination. But now, with Clara Sept's attack, I am not sure. Poirot filed away the detail, a shadow matching the figure in the portrait's hidden layer. He thanked Beatrice and moved on, his thoughts constructing a timeline. On the night of Reginald's death, arguments were heard in the study, likely about the brooch or the will. Victor was seen near the tower. Beatrice saw a shadow, and a ladder was found the next morning. The portrait, altered after the death, suggested someone sought to erase evidence of what happened. Seeking to test these threads, Poirot approached Lady Evelyn, who was tending a flower-bed near the Manassept's entrance. Madam, he said, your husband Sept's debts, Victor spoke of them. To whom did he owe money? Lady Evelyn Sept's face tightened, her trowel digging into the soil. Reginald was reckless in his final months, she admitted. He borrowed from unsavory lenders to save the estate. They came at night, demanding repayment. I begged him to stop, but he was stubborn. And the brooch? Poirot pressed. Was it part of these dealings? Perhaps, she said, her voice barely audible. He called it his insurance. But it vanished after his death. I don't know who took it. Poirot thanked her, his mind weaving the motives together. Victor's fear of ruin, Clara's greed for the brooch, Beatrice's resentment of Reginald's tyranny, and Julian's coerced alteration of the portrait. The debts introduced an external threat, but the tower and the portrait pointed to an inside hand. In the fading light, Poirot stood before the east tower, its silhouette looming over the garden. He recalled the scratches on the parapet, the ladder, the shadow in the portrait. "The truth is here," he told Hastings. "Someone stood at that window, watching or acting. The portrait hides their identity, but not for long." In his room, Poirot added to his notebook. The garden reveals motives: Victor's financial desperation, Clara's pursuit of the brooch, Beatrice's hatred, Julian's fear. The debts suggest outsiders, but the tower and portrait point to family. The shadow at the window is the key. Tomorrow I must confront the timeline and find the brooch. The manor was a cauldron of suspicion, its guests' motives blooming like the garden's roses, beautiful but laced with thorns. Poirot gazed at the tower, its shadow stretching across the lawn. The portrait's smile was a mask, and he was determined to tear it away. Chapter 11. The trap is set. The air in Blackthorn Manor was heavy with suspicion, each guest a shadow of doubt in the flickering candlelight. Hercule Poirot stood in the grand hall, his polished cane, tapping lightly against the floor, his little grey cells alight with purpose. The portrait's hidden lair, the tampered will, Clara's attack, and the motives revealed in the garden had brought him close to the truth. To unravel the final threads of Lord Reginald Blackthorn's death, Poirot devised a plan, a reenactment of that fatal night, designed to unsettle the guilty and provoke a slip. "Mon ami," Poirot said to Hastings, who stood by his side, "the mind of a murderer is like a tightly wound spring. Apply pressure, and it snaps. Tonight we set a trap." Hastings frowned, his voice low. "A reenactment. Poirot, that sip's risky. These people are already on edge after Clara Sip's attack." "Presses them," Poirot replied, his eyes gleaming. "Fear sharpens the senses, but it also loosens the tongue. We shall see who betrays themselves." Poirot gathered the guests in the dining room, where the portrait of Lord Reginald loomed, its altered smile a silent challenge. Lady Evelyn, Victor, Beatrice, Clara, Julian Moreau, and Dr. Langley sat around the table, their faces a mix of curiosity and unease. The air was thick with anticipation. As Poirot began, his voice calm but commanding. "Mesdames et messieurs," he said, "the death of Lord Reginald Blackthorn was no accident. The portrait, the brooch, the tower, all point to murder. Tonight we shall recreate the events of that night to uncover the truth. Each of you will play your part, as you were that evening." Lady Evelyn Sepp's hands trembled. "Monsieur Poirot, is this necessary?" "It's Sepp's, distressing." "Necessary, madame," Poirot said firmly. "The truth demands it. Let us begin." He assigned roles based on the timeline pieced together. Arguments in the study, Victor near the tower, Beatrice sighting of a shadow, the ladder found the next morning. Poirot positioned himself as Reginald, directing Victor to the hall outside the study where the argument was heard. "Monsieur Victor," he said, "you argued with your father about the brooch. Non. Reenact it." Victor's face flushed, but he complied, raising his voice in a mock argument. "Father, you can't keep holding that brooch over me. It's mine by right." His words were rehearsed, but his hands shook, betraying nervousness. Poirot, playing Reginald, responded with cold authority. "You will have it when I say, Victor. Until then, it remains my power." The other guests watched, their tension palpable. Beatrice, stationed near the library, called out, "I heard the shouts just as I did that night. Then I saw the shadow at the tower." Her voice wavered, her eyes darting to Victor. Poirot moved the scene to the base of the east tower, leading the group outside into the chilly night. The tower loomed above, its parapet barely visible in the moonlight. "Here," Poirot said. "Lord Reginald fell. A ladder was found, suggesting no accident." "Monsieur Victor, you were seen here. What did you see?" Victor Essep's jaw tightened. Nothing. I was checking the grounds, as I said. I didn't see him fall. Clara, standing nearby, scoffed. Convenient, Victor. You wanted that brooch, didn't set you? Just like I did. Poirot's eyes flicked to Clara, noting her provocation. He turned to Julian. Monsieur Moreau, you altered the portrait after Reginald Sitt's death, hiding a figure at this tower. Why? Julian Sepp's face paled, his hands stuffed in his pockets. I told you it was artistic choice, nothing more. But it was Dr. Langley who reacted unexpectedly. The physician, usually nervous and unobtrusive, dropped his spectacles, his hands trembling as he scrambled to retrieve them. This is nonsense, he blurted, his voice high. The tower, the portrait, it's all speculation. Reginald slipped, that's all. Poirot's gaze locked onto Langley, his little grey cells alert. Monsieur le Docteur, your agitation is most revealing. Were you at the tower that night? Did you see the shadow? Langley Sepp's face reddened. I was in my room, as I told the coroner. I certified the death accidental, due to a fall. You Sepp's stirring up ghosts, Poirot. Poirot smiled faintly, sensing a crack in Langley Sepp's composure. Ghosts, perhaps, but they speak. The portrait, Sepp's hidden figure, the ladder, the tampered will, all suggest a truth you may know. The group fell silent, their eyes darting between each other. Lady Evelyn clutched her shawl. Beatrice stared at the ground, and Clara's lips curled in a knowing smirk. Victor's fists clenched, and Julian looked ready to bolt. Poirot pressed his advantage, raising his voice. Someone stood at this tower, watching or acting. The portrait was changed to hide them.
Who was it?
Langley Sepp's voice cracked. I saw nothing, but there was a letter in Reginald Sepp's study after his death. It mentioned the brooch and a debt. I burned it to protect the family. Poirot Sepp's eyes gleamed. A letter, monsieur? Burned? This is most significant. You concealed evidence, perhaps to shield the killer. Langley stammered. Ah, didn't it mean it was to spare Lady Evelyn pain? The group erupted in murmurs, accusations flying. Clara pointed at Victor, Beatrice accused Langley of lying, and Julian retreated into silence. Poirot raised a hand, restoring order. Enough. The trap has sprung, and the truth is near. Return to the manor, and reflect on your secrets. As the guests dispersed, Hastings sidled up to Poirot. Langley Sepp's confession about the letter that Sepp's a bombshell, Poirot. Do you think he Sepp's the killer? Perhaps, Poirot said. Or he protects one. The letter, the brooch, the tower, they are linked. Langley Sepp's reaction is a clue, but the portrait holds the final piece. In his room, Poirot added to his notebook. The reenactment has shaken the guilty. Langley Sepp's burned letter confirms a cover-up, tied to the brooch and a debt. The figure at the tower, hidden in the portrait, is the key. Tomorrow, I confront the killer. The manor buzzed with fear, its guests unraveling under Poirot's pressure. He gazed at the east tower, its shadow a silent witness to the truth. The portrait's smile was crumbling, and Poirot was ready to expose the lie beneath. Chapter 12. The Lie Unraveled. The grand dining room of Blackthorn Manor was a stage set for revelation, its chandeliers casting a golden glow over the assembled guests. Hercule Poirot stood at the head of the table, his small frame commanding the room, his moustache impeccably groomed despite the late hour. The portrait of Lord Reginald Blackthorn loomed above, its altered smile a silent witness to the secrets Poirot was about to unravel. The guests, Lady Evelyn, Victor, Beatrice, Clara Winthrop, Julian Moreau, and Dr. Langley, sat in uneasy silence, their faces etched with dread and anticipation. Mesdames et messieurs, Poirot began, his voice steady as steel. The time has come to expose the lie behind Lord Reginald Sepp's smile. His death was no accident but a murder, concealed by paint and deception. Tonight Hercule Poirot reveals the truth. Lady Evelyn's hands trembled, clutching her shawl. Victor's jaw tightened, and Clara's eyes narrowed, her emerald brooch glinting defiantly. Beatrice stared at the portrait, while Julian's hands fidgeted in his lap. Langley, still shaken from his confession about the burned letter, adjusted his spectacles nervously. Poirot paced, his cane tapping rhythmically. Let us begin with the portrait. Its smile, altered after Reginald Sipp's death, hid a sterner expression and a figure at the east tower. Monsieur Moreau, you changed it. We? Under whose orders? Julian Sipp's face paled, his voice barely audible. Reginald, before he died. He said the original smile was too revealing, but after his death someone else insisted I paint over the figure.
Who?
Poirot pressed, his gaze piercing. Julian hesitated, then whispered, Dr. Langley. A gasp rippled through the room. Langley sputtered, That's Sipp's preposterous. I did no such thing. Poirot raised a hand, silencing him. Patience, Monsieur le Docteur. Let us reconstruct the night of the murder. Reginald argued in the study about the sapphire brooch and his will. Voices were heard. Victor's, perhaps others. Later he fell from the east tower, where scratches and a ladder suggest a staged accident. Beatrice saw a shadow at the window, mirrored in the portrait's hidden layer. He turned to Victor. Monsieur Victor, you were near the tower, driven by fear of financial ruin. Your father Sipp's debts threatened the estate, and the brooch was your salvation, but you did not act alone. Victor Sipp's fists clenched. I told you I didn't kill him. Non, Poirot said. But you knew more than you admitted. The tampered will found in the study was altered to secure the brooch for you. Who tampered with it? Poirot Sipp's eyes swept the room, settling on Dr. Langley. Monsieur Langley, you burned a letter mentioning the brooch and a debt. Why? To protect the family, you said. But I say it was to protect yourself. Langley Sipp's face reddened. I certified the death as accidental. I had no motive. Au contraire, Poirot said, his voice rising. You had the greatest motive, blackmail. Reginald owed money to dangerous men, and you were his intermediary. The letter you burned detailed your role. Non. You facilitated his dealings, but when he threatened to expose you, you acted. Langley leapt to his feet. That Sipp's absurd. I Sipp's am a doctor, not a murderer. Poirot's smile was cold, yet you ordered Julian to alter the portrait, to erase the figure at the tower. Your figure, monsieur. The hidden layer shows you standing at the window watching as Reginald fell. You pushed him, after an argument in the study, where you demanded payment for your silence. The room erupted in chaos. Lady Evelyn gasped. Beatrice clutched her locket, and Clara Sipp's smirk vanished. Victor shouted, Langley, you? Poirot continued, undeterred. The sapphire brooch was Reginald Sipp's leverage, but you saw it as your reward. You took it after his death, hiding it in the study Sipp's secret compartment. Clara, searching for the will, nearly found it, so you attacked her, leaving a note to misdirect us to the tower. Langley Sipp's spectacles slipped, his voice shrill. You have no proof. Poirot produced the tampered will and the note from Clara Sipp's attack. The handwriting matches the letter you burned, monsieur. The oil on the study Sipp's lock, the scratches on the tower, your clumsy attempts to stage an accident, and the portrait Sipp's hidden layer revealed by science betrays you. Langley staggered back, his face ashen. I only wanted what was owed me. Reginald was ruining us all. Lady Evelyn Sipp's voice broke. Arthur, how could you? Poirot, Sipp's gaze softened. Madam, your husband was a tyrant, but his death was a crime. Langley used his position to betray you, hiding behind the portrait Sipp's smile. Langley lunged for the door, but Victor blocked him, fury in his eyes. You killed my father. Poirot signaled Hastings to restrain Langley, who collapsed, sobbing. It was an impulse, he confessed. He laughed at me, said I, sipped and never see a penny. I pushed him, and he fell. The room fell silent, the weight of truth settling over it. Poirot addressed the guests. The brooch is hidden in the study Sipp's floorboard. Retrieve it, and let justice proceed. The portrait Sipp's lie is unraveled, and the smile no longer mocks us. As the guests dispersed shaken, Poirot stood before the portrait, its smile now a relic of deception. He had pieced together the puzzle, the debts, the brooch, the tower, the altered painting, all leading to Langley's guilt. The manor's shadows seemed lighter, but the scars of betrayal remained. In his notebook, Poirot wrote, "The lie is exposed, the killer unmasked, Langley Sepp's motive. Blackmail and greed drove him to murder. The portrait Sepp's hidden lair and the tampered will were his undoing. Tomorrow I depart, but the truth remains." The East Tower stood silent, its secrets laid bare. Poirot's little grey cells had triumphed, and the manor could begin to heal. Chapter 13. The Final Brushstroke. The morning sun bathed Blackthorn Manor in a gentle glow, softening the harsh lines of its stone facade. Hercule Poirot stood in the grand foyer, his suitcase packed, his polished cane resting against it. The mystery of Lord Reginald Blackthorn's death had been solved. Dr. Arthur Langley's confession, spurred by Poirot's revelation of the portrait's hidden lair and the tampered will, had unmasked the killer. The sapphire brooch, recovered from the study's secret compartment, lay safely in Lady Evelyn's hands. Yet, as Poirot prepared to depart, the weight of the manor's secrets lingered, a reminder of the human frailties he had uncovered. "Mon ami," Poirot said to Hastings, who fumbled with his own luggage. "The case is closed, but the heart of Blackthorn Manor still beats with sorrow. We have brought truth, but not always peace." Hastings nodded, his face sombre. "It seems a grim business, Poirot. Langley Sem's betrayal, the family Sem's lies. It seems left them all shaken. Do you think they sem recover?" "Time heals, mon ami," Poirot replied, his moustache twitching. "But only if they face the truth. Let us take our leave with dignity." Before departing, Poirot sought out Lady Evelyn, finding her in the drawing-room, seated beneath a window overlooking the gardens. Her silver hair was neatly pinned, but her eyes carried the weight of recent revelations. The sapphire brooch rested on a velvet cushion beside her, its deep blue catching the light like a captured star. "Madame," Poirot said, bowing, "I take my leave, but first I wish to speak. The truth has been revealed, and justice will follow. The Dr. Langley Sepp's actions were driven by greed and fear, but your husband Fitz's choices set the stage." Lady Evelyn's lips trembled, but she met his gaze. "Monsieur Poirot, you've done us a great service, yet it feels like a wound reopened. Reginald, he was not a kind man, but I loved him. To know he was betrayed by Arthur by his own debts." She paused, her voice breaking. "How did I not see it?" Poirot Sepp's expression softened. "The heart, madame, is often blind to the faults of those it loves. Reginald Sepp's obsession with the brooch, his secret dealings, they created a web that ensnared you all, but you are free now to rebuild." She touched the brooch, her fingers tracing its edges. "This cursed thing, part of me wants to destroy it, but it sits all I have left of him. What should I do, Monsieur Poirot?" "Keep it," Poirot said gently, "but as a reminder, not a chain. The curse is not in the jewel, but in the greed it inspired. Let it be a symbol of lessons learned." Lady Evelyn nodded, a tear slipping down her cheek. "And the portrait, that smile, it haunts me." Poirot glanced at the portrait, now removed to the drawing-room, its smile no longer a mystery but a relic of deception. "Hang it, madame, but know it for what it is. A lie painted over truth. Julian Moreau's alterations hid Langley's guilt, but they cannot hide the past. Let it remind you of the strength to move forward." She managed a faint smile. "You see so much, Monsieur Poirot." Poirot Sepp's eyes twinkled. "With the little grey cells, madame, and a belief that order can triumph over chaos. Your family, Victor, Beatrice, Clara, they must now choose their path. The manor is yours to heal." As Poirot turned to leave, Lady Evelyn called after him, "Will you return, monsieur? If we need you again—" Poirot paused, his hand on the door. "If the need arises, Hercule Poirot is never far, but I trust you will find your way." Outside, the car awaited, its engine purring as Harris, the driver, loaded their luggage. Hastings climbed in, but Poirot lingered, his gaze sweeping the manor one last time. The East Tower stood silent, its scratches and shadows now explained. The portrait's hidden figure, the tampered will, Clara's attack. All had pointed to Langley's desperate act of murder, driven by blackmail and greed over Reginald's debts. In the car, Hastings leaned forward. "Quite a case, Poirot. That portrait, it was the key all along, wasn't it?" "Oui, mon ami," Poirot said, settling into his seat. The portrait was a canvas of lies, but beneath it lay the truth. Langley Sept's figure at the tower, the altered smile, they betrayed him. The brooch, the will, the debts, all were threads, but the portrait was the frame. Hastings frowned. And Victor? Beatrice? They knew more than they let on. "Indeed," Poirot said. Victor Sept's fear of ruin, Beatrice Sept's talk of a curse, they hid their own truths, but they were not killers. Clara Sept's greed led her to danger, and Julian Sept's fear made him complicit. But Langley, he crossed the line. As the car wound through the countryside, Poirot reflected on the case. The sapphire brooch, a symbol of betrayal since Sir Edmund's scandal, had fueled Reginald's control and Langley's desperation. The portrait, with its hidden layer, had been Langley's attempt to erase his presence at the tower, but Poirot's little grey cells had seen through the paint. In his notebook he wrote, "The case of Blackthorn Manor is closed. Langley Sept's guilt, revealed by the portrait Sept's hidden layer and the tampered will, ends the mystery. The brooch is restored, the truth laid bare. The manor will heal, and I, Hercule Poirot, am ready for the next challenge." The car reached the station, and Poirot stepped out, the fresh air clearing his mind. The manor faded into the distance, its secrets exposed, its wounds open to the light. He boarded the train, his thoughts already turning to future mysteries. The portrait's smile no longer mocked, but the world, Poirot knew, was full of lies waiting to be unraveled.